The reason I typically prefer smaller camera bodies is you can always build them up into bigger camera bodies. You can add pieces and components to build them into the perfect rig to fit your needs for your project. The opposite isn't true for a bigger camera body. It can't get smaller to fit your needs or preferences. I typically shoot on either the FX3 or FX30 and have various rigging solutions that create different size packages based on the project's needs. These range on the smallest end from just using the bare camera body and lens, very minimalistic, to a medium-sized running gun setup with a top handle and a monitor, to all the way up to this setup that's fully rigged out with a V-mount, a huge top handle, the monitor, matte box, the whole 9 yards. This particular setup I usually use when I'm shooting on documentary style projects. It's really great because you can tuck it up into your arm. It's very comfortable, and this allows you to just shoot all day with no problems of the weight. Today I'm going to give a breakdown of this rig. We'll put it together, go through its components and features. At the end of the video, I'll talk about the pricing and if it was worth it. And then of course in the description below, I'll leave the links to all of the pieces themselves. All right, time to start the assembly process of this cinema rig. Starting with just the bare FX30 body itself. First things first, we're gonna add the Tilta full cage. Like I mentioned earlier, I rock a full Tilta cage on all of my cameras. That's for a couple of reasons. First one being protection. It adds a full metal frame all the way around the outside of the camera. And then additionally, gives me a ton of mounting points for things such as handles, base plates, HDMI extensions. It gives me NATO rails. So there's really just a plethora of reasons to use one of these. I also really like the Tilta one because it's got an Arca Swiss plate built into the bottom of it, so it easily fits right onto a DJI Ronin plate. It's got a little tool for tightening screws if you ever are forgetting one of those. That comes in super handy on set. And then finally, just the fit and finish. Tilta does a great job of making the corners really smooth and polished and everything of that nature. So I really like the Tilta brand stuff. I think that will become very clear throughout this build process. Next up, I always like to use an HDMI extension. This just so I'm not putting any extra wear and tear on the HDMI port itself. This Tilta little 3-inch HDMI extension is what I'm using, but the spot the screw goes through is plastic, so I like to just stick a washer under the head of the screw. That way I can really tighten it down and not have to worry about it like squishing the plastic too much or anything of that nature. Now, taking a look at the base plate that I use, I really like this one because it's super low profile and I have it on hand. To rotate that mount on there 90 degrees, I use a little small rig quick release Arca Swiss plate with another just Arca Swiss plate, bolt those together, and then it gives me that 90-degree transition. All right, so our next step there is now this little transition plate we made can slide into our Tilta base plate, and then our camera can lock down onto this setup. There we go. We're not gonna tighten that down quite yet. Next up, I have this little Tilta V-mount battery plate. This is one, originally it was designed to go below a camera. I had this one on hand. However, you could easily use something quite a bit simpler that didn't have the connections built in. You could easily use a more standard plate like this that didn't have any electronics. This piece in particular, you can also see I don't have the contacts for the V-mount in there. Those got mangled at some point, so I just completely took them out. And so now it doesn't actually connect to the V-mount battery with power, it just kind of holds it in place. So first step with this guy, I have these small rig carbon fiber rods, and I'm gonna insert those into here. I think these were longer at some point, but I believe I just chopped off the rods with a hacksaw. To get our spacing of that guy, we'll mount our V-mount battery on there. I use the FX Lion V-mount batteries. I have a bunch of Nano 1, a bunch of Nano 2s, but there's a lot of micro V-mount batteries out there now from Small Rig. There's a bunch of other companies that all make various micro V-mount batteries, so do your research, and then I would say stick with one brand, pick one and just roll with it. For me, that's FX Lion. We are gonna pop the screen out on the camera, and that's gonna help us get the spacing of this battery mount just how we like it. So we'll start by inserting the rods into the back of the plate. I'm going to put it so I can just barely fit the screen back closed and it won't hit on the battery mount. All right, so continuing to look at the base plate, this is just a generic cheese plate. We're gonna use that as a spacer so that we can make a level base for this camera. Both the base plate itself and this back cheese plate will perfectly rest on the table, and it'll just make it super stable to set it down and not have to worry about it. So we'll hold the base plate flat, and then we'll just start to tighten down this cheese plate so that it acts almost as a foot. All right, we've got that guy tightened down, and look how stable that is now. It sits perfectly on both the base plate and that cheese plate, and there's no rocking, there's no movement when it sits there on a table. Next up, we're gonna start work on the top handle setup for this camera. And this is really somewhere where I spent a lot of time in the design process of this rig, trying to find something that went all the way long across the top and also wrapped around with a nice angle and bent around the back of the camera. That back handle piece really allows for two things. First, really stick that into your armpit when you're shooting handheld, and it gives you another point of contact. I was saying that really helps keep it stable on long shoot days. Second, it adds a bunch of extra mounting points. So first we're gonna get the top handle fully assembled, and then we're gonna get some NATO rails mounted on here that would be perfect for mounting it. These Small Rig top handles are really the heart of the whole top handle. On one end they have a cold shoe, and on the other they have a RE 3/8 mounting hole pattern. I wish they had that on both sides. What makes them a really unique top handle on the market is that the mount itself can slide back and forth so that you can really position it where you want. They also offer different mounting options depending on what you want. We have two that are both NATO rail in this situation. And we've got to kind of mix and match pieces with this setup. There's a couple top handle solutions that are now on the market that offer some more unique building block pieces. You know, Wooden Camera offers one, Mid 49 offers one, but today we're using these Small Rig pieces. The next in the lineup will be a Small Rig top handle extension piece. These are designed to work together as a kit. Small Rig actually discontinued these handle extension pieces. That's why I only have one of them. I have another handle extension here in a second that we'll go over. But in this situation, since I already had one, I was able to put it to use. I really wish they would bring this extension back, as well as some additional extension and handle mounting pieces to make it a little more customizable. And the next piece we have in the lineup is another top handle extension. This one's from Tilta, so it doesn't perfectly match, but it uses the standard RE mounting pins so they at least lock together and stay super stable. All right, moving on, this next piece is another piece from Tilta, part of the same handle lineup, but it's a 90-degree turn. It's got this nice angled bit, and so it'll bolt right on there. And this is where I had to get a little bit creative. Going into the other top handle, I had to convert that 3/8 screw to a 1/4-20, add some little mounting pins in there. Didn't necessarily need those, but just like it in terms. Now I know that those can't ever rotate, and then I drop another screw down in there, this time a 1/4-20, and I can bolt these last two handle pieces together. All right, so now I have this whole big top handle, Both of these mounts are adjustable, so I've got to get it sized right to fit on this rig. And the way I'm going to do that is by adding an additional NATO rail that'll mount here on the back of the camera rig. And that is where the back mounting NATO point will latch onto, really fully enclosing this whole setup and locking everything in place. All right, and at that point, once we have the NATO rails and this adjustment locked into place, we can go ahead and tighten these screws on the top handles that allow this vertical piece to slide, and that'll really lock down the whole top handle in place. That is a good portion of our rig done. Kind of giving an overview, we have our camera and our cage. We have this base plate and rail system along the bottom, as well as this fully bolted together top handle along the top. So everything is fully bolted down, extremely rigid, and completely surrounds the camera body. So this is just a really locked down setup like that. Next up, we're going to take a look at our monitor and mounting that. This is the Small HD Ultra 5. Now, it is an extremely expensive monitor. I think this monitor is maybe just as much as the camera body itself, but the thing is, once you use a Small HD monitor, I don't think you'll ever switch. I think the quality, the colors, the brightness, the build quality, everything about this monitor, the Ultra 5, is indestructible. You really get this monitor, and it's a monitor for 5 to 10 years. So I have 2 of these and I really love them. Could not more recommend them. First, we're gonna add the small rig mounting arm to the bottom of the monitor. This is great because it's got their pins, so it really locks on there, does not turn or move ever. Okay, and then we're also gonna add another NATO rail, this time to the top handle. So just a small little NATO rail, and we'll bolt that guy right on top. This is a fully built out rig. However, the perk is that I could take everything apart, have just the camera body in a matter of seconds because of the NATO rail here and the Arca Swiss plate at the bottom. And that ethos kind of continues throughout the whole thing, being able to make sure I can take it apart and put it back together in a matter of seconds. On top of the NATO rail, I've added just a little NATO clamp. This one again has locating pins to make sure nothing moves. That's something I really look for in hardware and components, is to make sure it has spots for latching pins, just so that nothing ever shakes loose, ever comes loose. It's all just rock solid. From here is starting to get into the smaller pieces of the build. We'll go ahead and add this mount that we'll use for the microphone. This will go on right at the front of the top handle, and this is just being mounted with a little cold shoe plate, and we'll just get that screwed on. And that'll give us a perfect spot to mount our microphone. On this guy, we're using it's a Sennheiser mic, MKE 400. That's the perfect mic for this setup because it gives me totally usable, passable scratch audio, but often when I'm using this setup, I also have subjects labbed up, so it's not make or break with this audio. Now, the next piece we're gonna get mounted is this little metal mounting bracket. This will work with the Tentacle Sync timecode boxes. This will go right on the back of the rig at the very bottom and give us the perfect spot to mount our timecode box, where it's out of the way. The wire's pretty much in a straight line up to the side of the camera, and we don't have to think about it. And then kind of jumping ahead here, we're gonna do a little bit of cable management. So these are some little cable management hooks made by Condor Blue. Next up, we're gonna go ahead and just plug in this USB-C cable from our V-mount to our camera body. That's nice because now this whole big V-mount battery is powering the camera itself. It'll never run out of battery, not never, but it'll go a long time. And another piece we're gonna throw on here is the Fujinon 18-55. This is a crop lens for a crop camera body. I love using that with these Fujinon MK Cine Zoom lenses. I have both the 18-55 and the 50-135, and these are just fantastic. Another piece here on the front is the Tilta matte box. We'll go ahead. This is a screw-on matte box, so we'll screw on that adapter ring and then tighten the matte box down onto that. Getting into the final stretch here, it's time to do some cables and some cable management. So I'm gonna stick my monitor back onto the rig. We're gonna run first our HDMI cable. This is just the Condor Blue HDMI cable. And I wanna make sure I have full range of motion with this monitor. It looks great. And just like that, we are on to the final piece of the puzzle, which is power for the monitor. And for power for that, we're using the 2-pin LEMO cable that SmallRig provides. I just want to make sure it has plenty of slack to where I can put the monitor at any angle and it will never pull on the cable. We'll just tuck the rest of that cable in between the camera body itself and the V-mount battery, and then it will plug in via D-tap. And just like that, our camera rig is pretty much done. We are going to do a couple other things while we're here. First of them being to make a tripod plate. Most of my tripods that I use work on the Manfrotto 501 plates, whereas this rig on the bottom of the base plate is just the ARRI dovetail standard. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a 8-inch dovetail plate. We're just gonna bolt a standard Manfrotto plate to the bottom. Now with this plate, we're able to just slide it onto the bottom of the rig, and now we have a Manfrotto tripod plate adapter. There is one final thing that I'm gonna add to this handle, and that is a grip. And this grip we'll be adding is just a grip designed for a tennis racket. This does a couple things. First, it helps with the calluses. It makes it more comfortable to hold this grip all day long. You know, it's just not as harsh on your hands. And second, it gives a fun, nice, cool pop of color to your setup that I think just adds something to it. And then we essentially just wrap it around the handle. And to finish it off at the bottom, I like to wrap it with a little bit of gaff tape, and that just holds it in place. There we have it. The rig is all put together and ready to roll for us. Now the question being, was it worth it? Yes, it was absolutely worth it. There is nothing that beats this protection, the usability of this rig. Like I said, shooting all day, throwing it on a tripod, it's really good for whatever. As long as you're good with the weight, then this rig can tackle anything, and I absolutely love this setup, and so it's become very versatile for me.